Hi everyone, how are you doing today? I really hope that you are all fine, good, or even awesome. I'm apologize because I cannot attend our meeting today, but I have prepared two videos and activities for you. So hopefully you will see Alok and then find what activities you need to do through this class, and then we will meet again next week and we will discuss or we will continue our lesson in statistics. So today I want to talk about statistical inference or inferential statistics, the same thing. But before we go to that topic, I think I want to introduce you to the idea of population sampling and sampling technique. This topic relates to statistical inference because in statistical inference we usually want to generalize what we found in a sample into a population. So I think it's good for you to know what is population, what is sample, and then what is sampling techniques. So let's begin. So what is population? So population is all events or cases that are of researchers' interest. So population can be human, can be people, can be groups, can be countries, can be even event like when you toss a coin, and then all of possible outcome that you can have when you toss a coin is a population. So therefore population theoretically can be big, just like all adolescents in a country or all students in the world, or very, very small, like a family or even a person. However, when we talked about population, usually we refer to a big groups. So in the population, we can also calculate the mean, the median, mode, or standard deviation, variance, and everything else. So those characteristics, which are quantitative, is called parameters. So quantitative characteristics of a population are called parameters. So the mean of population, the variance of height of all people in the world, or the mean of the weight of all students in University of Gajah Mada are parameters. Now we turn to sample. So what is a sample? A sample is a part or a portion of a population. So if you once went to a mall or a store, sometimes they offer you samples, like a sample of cookies, a sample of cake, or maybe a sample of other foods, or a sample of perfume. So those are only a part or a portion of a population. Now, quantitative characteristics of a sample are called statistics. The mean, median, mode, all of the quantitative characteristics, but you calculate it based on data that you get from a sample, are called statistics. The mean of a statistic is a counterpart of the mean of the parameters. The variance of a statistic, the counterpart of variance of a population. So hopefully now you understand what is population and sample. But the question might be that how can we get the portion of the population? So now we have arrived at the problem of sampling techniques. There are two big classifications of sampling techniques. The first is probabilistic, and the second is non-probabilistic. The probabilistic sampling techniques were techniques that take sample randomly. So in probabilistic sampling techniques, samples are selected randomly. Random sampling ensures that every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected as part of the sample. It might be a bit different with how common people see or think about random. Most people think of random as kind of like without any rules, or you just taken chaotically. But random sampling was a technique of taking a sample that ensures that every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected as part of the sample. It means random sampling sometimes, or maybe oftentimes, are very systematic. So we will see one by one. The first is simple random sample, or SRS. So in simple random sampling, a person first have a list of all people in the population. After we have all the people, the list of all people, then we will conduct a random numbers, or we can select these people randomly by the helps of computer programs, or sometimes use a raffle, so we can pick people into the sample randomly. By using all of those techniques, we hopefully will get, or we provide every member of a population equal chance to become the member of the sample. So if you can see that simple random sampling, as it's the name of the sampling technique, is simple. You just get the list of all people in the population and then take it randomly, select randomly from this list by the help of any tools. So we can get like a portion of that sample. Well, sometimes simple random sampling have its limitation. It has a disadvantage when you actually have a very, very big population. And inside the population, you have like subpopulation or groups. But then the groups in the population or the subpopulation doesn't have equal numbers, or have a big differences between the largest subpopulation to the smallest subpopulation. So in this case, if you do the simple random sampling and you took only like a very small portion of the population, that you might lose, or you might not take the subpopulation that have small numbers of people inside. So how to prevent this to happen? So we can turn into stratified random sampling. So in stratified random sampling, we start the process by identifying the subpopulation, and then after we list all people in the subpopulation, then we take randomly in each of the subpopulation. So using this technique, we make sure that every subpopulation will be represented by some group of people in the sample. The third sampling technique is called clustered sampling. So the idea of clustered sampling is that we start similarly with the stratified sampling, that we identify the subpopulation. Now, what is different with stratified sampling is that we will not take a sample from every every groups or every subpopulation, but we pick or select some clusters, some subpopulation as our sample. So for example, in this picture, let's say we identify 4 subpopulation. Now, out of 4, we will choose one randomly to become our sample. So after we pick randomly one subpopulation, now all people in that subpopulation became our sample. The last one in this presentation is that the one that is called two-stage random sampling. So as the name of the sampling techniques, we proceed with 2 stages of sampling. So first we can start with clustered sampling. So we identified the subpopulation and then we select randomly some of the subpopulation. But then after we pick randomly some of the subpopulation, in every subpopulation we take randomly again only several person in the subpopulation to become our samples. So it's as if we do cluster random sampling first, and then after we get some clusters, then in every clusters we do a stratified random sampling. So now we have a smaller sample, but hopefully it would still representative of the whole population. So those are the random sampling techniques. Now, although sampling the probabilistic sampling techniques are something like golden rule in taking sample, but the problem is most of the time it's really tedious and also required a lot of funding and also a lot of energy and time. So usually researchers in psychology choose not to get the probabilistic sampling, but choose the non-probabilistic sampling. So in a non-probabilistic sampling, we actually not given every member of the population equal a chance to become the member of the sample. So there are at least 3 non-probabilistic sampling techniques. The first is purposive, and then the second is convenience, and the last one is voluntary. So first I want to talk about the convenience first, because the purposive is kind of like have a lot of many other subclasses of non-probabilistic sample. So we will talk about convenience first. So convenience sampling, as the name, is a sampling techniques that take the samples by convenience. So let's say I took sample for my study by asking my students that attend my classes to become my sample. Or if a student's taking conducting a research, and then usually they take their friends or maybe their neighbors, or maybe they ask permission to the professors so they can come into their class and then take the data from the students there. So all of these data was taken, all of this sample was taken because they are available and easily taken by the researchers. So that's what it means by convenient sample. Uh, the next sampling technique is called voluntary sample. So as the name shows that the sampling technique was taken by asking people voluntarily to become the sample. So sometimes you can put like an advertisement on a board or announcement on a board and then saying that today or like I'm doing research about this topic and then I need some students with the criteria of, let's say, he or she should be the first year students, and then she can be from any background. She should be someone who listens to pop music, something like that, and all of this criteria. And if you have those characteristics and interested in becoming the participants, please call this number or please send me or please fill in the forms, something like that. So that's our voluntary sampling. So people who comes into your research to become your sample are those who reads the announcement and then decided uh, to be involved in your research. So that's convenience and voluntary. So what about purposive sample? So there are any um, several variations of purposive samples. So the first is this. That's what we call maximum variance sampling. So purposive sampling are sampling techniques that has a particular a particular purpose in conducting the sampling. So for example, maximum variance sampling have a purpose in taking a sample so that we maximize the variance when we get the samples. So we want to make sure that our samples have the biggest variation as possible. So let's say if we want to get a sample from Gajah Mada University and we want to maximize the variance. So let's say we take from every study program, and then after that we make sure that we take um, all genders, we take all demographic backgrounds. So every all of these was taken into consideration when we get someone into our sample. So because we want to maximize the variation. The next sampling techniques that's also considered purposive is homogeneous sampling. So it's contrary to the maximum variance sampling. Homogeneous sampling is trying to get a sample that as homogeneous as possible. So let's say again we want to get a sample from Gajah Mada University students, and then we actually want to learn about um, let's say anxiety, and then we get the sample from this population, and then we make sure that the sample have only a certain amount of anxiety. So we don't want the samples to have people who have like a very high anxiety or a very low anxiety, but we want to make sure that we just have some like all the people that we select in the sample are having a similar amount of anxiety. It can be very big, it can be very high, it can be very small, but it has to be similar to each other. The next sampling technique that is considered purposive is typical case sampling. This is similar to homogeneous sampling, but the difference is that in typical case sampling, we actually try to find the typical case in the population. For example, again, using the anxiety example, we want to get a sample that um, representing the typical case that happened in the population. For example, if in the population the typical cases are people who have low anxiety, then we want to get people who have low anxiety to be our sample. If the typical case of samples of the population, I mean, is people who have a high anxiety, then we want to get those people with high anxiety as our sample. So the difference between these and the homogeneous is that in homogeneous, there are some consideration to pick only people with a certain amount of anxiety. And it can be high, it can be low. And then the choice is because we have some purpose in picking this low or high anxiety. For example, if I want to make a study as a treatment to reduce anxiety, then I want to make or I want to pick people who have a high level of anxiety, and I want to make it homogeneous as possible because I want to see the effect of my treatment for those kind of people who have a high level of anxiety. But in the typical case sampling, the choice of whether I pick the high level anxiety or low level anxiety is depend on which one of these cases that is typical in the population. So for let's say people in students in Gajah Mada University, is if the typical case are those students who have like maybe moderate level of anxiety, then I should get uh, students with moderate level of anxiety because I want to get the typical case. The the other way, the other sampling techniques is called extreme case sampling. So an extreme case sampling is kind of like in the contrary of the typical case. So typical case are people who are typically you can find it a lot in the population. But extreme case sampling are those people who were having for in the anxiety level case, you will pick people who have extreme anxiety given the typical case. For example, so for a population with a moderate level of anxiety, then the typical case sampling will pick people who have moderate level of anxiety. But the extreme case sampling will get people with a very high level of anxiety and very low level of anxiety. So pick the extreme case sample. The next sampling techniques that is considered purposive is called critical case sampling. So in critical case sampling, um, researchers will take a sample of people that if I can get results from the sample, then the results will automatically generalize to other sample or generalize to the whole population. So for example, a research was conducted to examine the effectiveness of an intervention aimed at increasing learning motivation while simultaneously reducing bullying rates. The researchers selected a school with students from diverse backgrounds, and also that school was known as a problematic school. So why he picked that school? So the consideration for choosing this school as the sample was that if I can make an intervention succeeded producing satisfactory results in this school, then it is highly likely that that intervention would also succeed in less problematic schools. So that's what we call as a critical case sampling. So if my intervention will be successful in this sample, then I can guarantee that it will be successful in the other sample. Um, the last one in this presentation, I believe there will be a lot more, but for our presentations, the last sampling techniques that's considered purposive is what we call expert sampling. So expert sampling was taken. So we pick sample, or so we select people to become our samples that we considered as experts. For example, so the research was conducted to identify indicators of polite behavior from the perspective of people from a specific cultures. So let's say I want to know what is polite behavior from the perspective of Javanese people, from the perspective of maybe Papuan people, or maybe from other cultures people, or maybe from collectivist or individualist, or from Western people or Eastern people. So from any specific cultures. And then I select a group of experts, in this case, individuals with knowledge and understanding of that culture, as the sample. So let's say if I want to know about what is a polite behavior from the perspective of Javanese people, then I will pick people who understand very well of Javanese culture as my experts. So these people become my sample. So the aim of this selection was to enable researchers to obtain indicators that accurately represent polite behavior in, for example, Javanese culture. So that's what we call as expert sampling.